Welcome, one and all, hopefully more than one, to the very first official edition of Bibles and Bullhorns, a new evangelism podcast. I'm one of your hosts, JD Morris with Iron Outreach out of Pennsylvania. With me, I'd like to introduce your other host, John Neifert of Tulip Gospel Outreach out of Iowa. John, how are we doing this afternoon?
We are doing great, and I'm just coming off some great evangelism activities out at the Iowa State Fair. So
awesome. So we want to introduce ourselves here. We want to obviously thank everybody who's making time to listen to us. We know there's probably 5 million podcasts out in the world, and we're kind of trying to squeeze one more onto the bookshelf. And we thank you for taking us down and giving us a look. The idea behind Bibles and Bullhorn. So John and I think we're both, I think, John, you'd agree with this. We're both evangelism nerds. We like to talk shop and discuss what works and what doesn't work and swap, war stories and stuff like that. And so we kind of had the idea, really, you had the idea to get together and start this evangelism podcast. And in discussing what it would look like, what we decided would be great was if there was a podcast that invited on evangelists who are out there doing it, who are out there in the trenches, whether part-time or full-time, they're out there on a regular basis evangelizing, sharing the gospel. So what we want to do is each time we meet, we want to bring someone in and kind of pick their brain a little bit, find out what they think works, what doesn't work, how they got started, advice they might have for other evangelists. And I think on that note, it's important, of course, to point out, and I know we're in agreement on this, even though we're going to be bringing people in and we're going to be discussing their life a little bit and perhaps their testimonies and their stories, the goal isn't to glorify our guests, of course, and it's not to glorify us. This is all to point towards Christ and to glorify him. So with that, I'm very excited to introduce our first official guest here on Bibles and Bullhorns. His name is Eddie Roman. He is the director and producer of the Living Waters television program, Way of the Master. He's actually been with Living Waters for 13 years. So as you can tell, he has a hard time holding down a job. Eddie, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. It's good to hear. Sure. Man, 13 years. That's amazing.
Goes by in the blink of an eye, right? So Eddie is also the author of a book called Search and Rescue, which is available on Amazon. You can also find it on his website, eddieroman.com. And he's also the host of a podcast of his own, which is called Roman's Road. I listened to it personally on Spotify. I know that it's there for those who would like to check it out. I'm sure it's in a lot of other places as well. Great podcast. Also focuses on evangelism. Eddie, we're excited to have you. I think the first question I have for you is, how'd you end up with Living Waters? And were you evangelizing before you got there, or is that how you got your start?
Boy, so was I evangelizing before Living Waters? Absolutely not. I was the typical Christian serving in ministry, going to church, surrounded by Christian friends and Christian family, and had a Christian dog, and everything in my life was Christian, but outside the church was scared to death to evangelize. And so, no, absolutely not. Actually, the way I met up and came into contact with Ray and the guys is directly related to the fact that I wasn't evangelizing. I basically went through about a year of feeling really convicted that I wasn't evangelizing. It was really interesting. It came out of nowhere. I've been doing video production for most of my adult life. And at the time I was producing as a freelancer for ministries like Greg Laurie and Franklin Graham and the Billy Graham Association. And so I was around a lot of big crusade evangelism. People would come down to the front and say the sinner's prayer, and I was on them with a camera trying to get their tears and some good testimonies. And so I was around big crusade evangelism quite a bit, but never even attempted to do it myself. And so after a while, I started being really convicted. Like I said, went through about a year of attempting to talk to my friends and family and just for every different common reason, I just couldn't do it. I was afraid. I didn't think I'd know what to say. I didn't think they would accept it. I thought they'd get mad at me, and just kind of all the typical reasons that Christians don't evangelize. And then at some point, I was on this new thing called the internet and came across this guy named Ray Comfort and started watching his videos and liked them and started learning. And the next thing I knew, I was explaining the gospel to a friend using the law, just in the typical way, the master way. And he ended up receiving it. And then shortly after that, I saw that they were advertising this thing called the Ambassadors Academy, which is a 4-day seminar where it's training in the morning, and then you go out on the street with Ray and Mark and Easy and the other guys. And I thought, this might help. This might be good. And boy, that weekend absolutely changed my life. I went from someone who was afraid to give out a tract to someone who open air preaches regularly every week. And I've been doing that ever since. And that was about 13, 14 years ago. And so that's how I came into contact with evangelism and Living Waters at the same time. And then not long after the Academy, Living Waters put out a job posting looking for a video producer. And then that's kind of how I ended up there.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Eddie, you have and shared with us one of your videos around using the paint board and so on, right? And you are going at regularly open air evangelism, right? Is that kind of your typical method, or do you kind of mix things up? How do you approach it? How did you get started on that paint board?
Yeah, I actually mix things up quite a bit.
Could you explain what the paint board is too while you're at it? Because some people might not be familiar with the technique.
Yeah, I actually mix things up quite a bit. So the paint board is basically a technique taught by open air campaigners. That's a ministry that they train people in open air evangelism, and they use a paint board. So basically they teach you how to paint your way through a gospel presentation. It's super effective out on the street because people just get curious. They have glow in the dark paints with LED fluorescent lights. So at night, it's a super effective way for people just to come over and check out what you're doing. But yeah, so that's open air campaigner. So I use that technique quite a bit, but I'm kind of like the evangelism chameleon, where I do all kinds of different methods. So if I'm training a group from my church, my favorite method is to use this thing I call the riddle, and it's basically a big riddle painted on a board. And with myself, with the glowing paint board, this sign is glowing at night, but I don't paint it every time. It's just there. And I've done it in the day as well with a non-glowing sign, but it's basically a riddle. The answer to the riddle leads into a gospel conversation. And so it's a very effective way for people to come over, because they're coming over to you. They're trying to figure out this thing, and it's kind of fun for them. And so what I found is that when I take people out from my church to train them, they just kind of stand right there and they can watch, and they don't have to learn painting skills. They don't have to get up on a box. It's just kind of a very easy way to see someone else evangelize. What's that?
Brass painting.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, if I had his hair, I might attempt to be like Bob Ross, but I just don't have the hair. But yeah, so I like using the riddle. So I do a lot of personal one-to-one evangelism. I have a friend recently who called me, and he's got a new spot up in Riverside, California, where he's been going out just open air preaching. So I've been going with him, and we just open our Bibles and kind of walk around, not even standing on a box, just in a public area, just kind of doing expository preaching where the last time we did it, I went through the story of the rich man and Lazarus. And so read a couple verses and then just preach about heaven and hell, and the fact that here's these two guys, and even though in life they looked very, like, one of them looked really good, one of them looked not so good. In the afterlife, it's reversed. So anyway, I'm basically preaching a sermon to just the people around the open air. And so I really kind of do. It seems like I like to just do whatever the method that the people I'm with is doing. But if I'm the one leading it, it just kind of depends. I just love it all. I just love preaching the gospel, whatever different kind of method.
One thing I like about the paintboard, and I think this kind of speaks to the whole idea of being an evangelistic chameleon. I often tell people when I'm training them, like people who are new, and I'm bringing them out for the first time to evangelize. I often say, if you're not having fun, you're probably not doing it correctly. So one of the things I like about the paintboard, because sharing the gospel is serious business, but that doesn't mean that we have to have a scowl on our face or a stoic look. Like, we can go out and have fun with people, which I think actually,
Right.
we're called to share with gentleness and respect. So I think when we go out and have a smile on our face and have fun with this message, I think it helps people know that we're there to give them a message that is kind of a message of condemnation in some respects, but at the same time, it helps them know that we're not there to condemn them. We're there to warn them out of love of condemnation to come. And it helps them know that we're coming from a good place. So one of the things I like about the paintboard is I've seen, videos that you've done where it makes people smile.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I kind of look at the paintboard as somewhere in between one-to-one evangelism and standing on a box open air
Mm-hmm.
preaching, because one thing is people are coming to you. So like so much of the challenge with standing on a box and just open air preaching is to get people to listen to you or to stop and listen. At least
Mm-hmm.
that's the perceived problem, because I think the typical picture of that is you're standing on a box, you're preaching, and there's people walking by, and it's very rare that you get a big crowd. And so the criticism is, well, that's not effective. Nobody stops.
Yeah.
But for anyone who's done that, firsthand that pretty much there's always going to be someone listening, even if it's one person. They might be off to the side. They might be acting as if they're not listening to you.
Yes.
You might not even see them. They might be behind you. But I can't remember any time that I've ever gone out in the last 13 years where I've open air preached with that method where I haven't gotten into some conversation or someone hasn't come and said something after. So it might not be 50 people, but if it's one person, then that's great. Now, the thing about the paintboard is I'll start painting, and it takes me about, I don't know, 10 minutes or so to get to the place where I'm ready to start my message. I kind of set it up, and that's purposeful, because what happens is in that 10 minutes, if I'm at a pier or someplace where people are just kind of wandering around with nothing to do, just looking for, I don't know, something to look at, within that 10 minutes, sometimes I'll turn around and there'll be 50 people standing behind me, just waiting for me to do something, So at that point, I'll look at them and I'll just start conversing with them, and then just go into the gospel message. So that's one of the things that just makes it so amazing. Now, what'll happen is when I start talking about sin, the crowd slowly starts to leave, just like happens in any other kind of open air situation often. But the fact that they came to me and they're sitting there listening, it's not as volatile. It's not as instantly, oh, this guy's preaching, I hate him, no matter what he's saying. It's funny because I pretty much have the same, I don't know, maybe mannerisms or loudness of speech or just countenance, whether I'm on the paintboard or I'm open air preaching. But when I'm open air preaching without the paintboard, people will say things like, "Oh, you're so angry, you're so mad," and I'm like, "I'm not." And it's just funny. It's just that perceived thing. People
Yeah.
think preacher, he's a hater, But with the
It's bright
paintboard, it's
colors.
just
Yeah.
it kind of gets rid of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the bright, happy colors.
Fun
Nobody's in a
stuff.
bad mood when there's
That's
fluorescent,
right.
pink and yellow
Right.
on there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, got to cheer them up.
Yeah, and let me go back a little bit to the community. the chameleon aspect that you talked about, right? Because I think it's great to have different experiences and things like that too. But when someone is starting out, and whether it's open air or paintboard or one-on-one conversations, right? It's good to try a few different approaches and really
Yeah.
figure out what fits you well. And when I was at the Ambassadors Academy this year, I had a couple people who were really getting excited about the open air preaching. So I had them try a few different things, right? And one was what you talked about it, with the expository preaching, right? Go to a passage, read it, explain it, share how it ties in with the gospel and so on from there. For one guy, it fit really well. And another guy said, no, this just really isn't me. I prefer this other way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I
love
have
that.
I have a good friend who, he moved to Texas a while ago, but we would go out open air preaching together for years. And we would kind of do, a little bit of everything. And whenever I would do the paintboard, he would always talk about how he needs to learn how to do that. And he really just thinks it's awesome and he loves it and he wants to learn how to do it. But when he would just preach, it was amazing. Like, he was such a good, effective open air preacher, just opening up his Bible and calling out to people to repent. So so it's like, my encouragement to him was, don't learn how to paint, just keep doing what you're doing, because he was
Right.
great. So one thing I don't like is when evangelists basically criticize other evangelists for not doing it the way they do it, whether
Yes.
that's in a method or the tracks you give out or different things. I mean, there's a lot to be said about the correct theology within a tract or any message. So that's definitely important. But I've always kind of walked away from any kind of conversations that have to do with, oh, you should be doing it this way because this is the best way. In my mind, that's no different than all the different denominations of churches. Oh, you shouldn't be doing your worship that way because that's the wrong way. You should be doing it this way. And it comes down to a preference issue. I think so much of the arguments people get in disagreements, people get caught up in evangelism, is just comes down to preferences. It's like, hey, I like glowing paint, leave me alone.
Yeah.
I
Now,
think
Eddie,
there's
do you go out alone ever, or do you always have someone with you?
Rarely.
I found
So I rarely go out alone. So um, I actually found myself alone on my weekly evangelism thing for the first time in about probably 6 or 7 years, just a couple weeks ago. But I think it's because I had just gotten back from this long period of being away. And when I went out, my team didn't know I was back. And I just told them like the day before, and they all had stuff to do. So, but it's pretty rare that I go out alone. And part of that is I'm very involved at my church, and I have a pretty strong evangelism team. So I'm constantly just training people. So I really don't go out. So my main purpose of going out nowadays is to teach other people how to evangelize. And so, yeah, it's just kind of a weird place to be. That's actually probably the reason I do the riddle more often. That's how I started doing it more, because I would be painting, and then in the times I'm not painting, the riddle's up. And so we started getting the conversation. And what I found is that the people in my church were a lot more willing to get involved and go out to do the riddle than they were to stand around and watch me preach and paint, you know?
Right.
So that's kind of how I ended up doing that.
I've evangelized by myself many times, and I've done it with friends or family members many times. I'm not opposed to doing it myself, and oftentimes I'm just in a situation where I have to. But nothing beats going out with someone. I think there's something to be said for the fact that Jesus sent them out two by two, and when you're out there with someone, and there's just a different There's just something different, taking place when there's even if you guys like split up a little bit, one person's having a conversation, but just that ability to kind of like correspond with each other and kind of talk about what's going on, which actually brings me to, so a lot of people who are familiar with you would know you best from your involvement with Way of the Master. So obviously, Living Waters is a pretty well-known evangelism organization. It's actually, through the Ambassadors Academy that Jon and I both met. And your role there is primarily as producer and director of the show Way of the Master. So one of my favorite things on Way of the Master is after it's usually after, I think, after Ray Comfort is done sharing the gospel with somebody, the camera will then switch to you and Ray talking about what took place. I like to call it a post-mortem, where you kind of just do like you kind of do like a little like quick conversation about, how the guy responded. Sometimes, the conversation, like when I'm out with like friends of mine and we're evangelizing, sometimes we'll even talk about like, we could see it in a person's face. Like, here's the expression they made when the gospel clicked and it made sense to them. We'll just talk about how it went. I kind of, for the same reason, I like listening to your podcast, Romans Road, because what you do there is you have these longer conversations with someone. They might only be 10 minutes, but the podcast kind of stretches them out to an hour, because
Right.
what you do is you actually pause in between and then you start giving commentary as you go. I guess that wouldn't technically be a post-mortem. That might be like a mid-mortem. I don't know. Wasn't an English major.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I almost look at it like you're doing like exegesis on the conversation, like you're pausing verse by verse and discussing like what you're seeing. Is like an expository sermon on the conversation. One of the things I've noticed in the conversations that you have is that you seem to have a really good sense for when to stop talking and to let the guy or gal continue to go. There's been a lot of times when I've listened to you, and I like in my head, I'm like, I wish I could jump in there. Like I have this to say, I have that to say. But I almost, it just makes sense. I hear you in your silence. Like I hear what's kind of going through your head. Like, no, here's where I have to stop and let this person talk. Can you take us through what that process might look like for you when you're talking to someone?
You hear me in my silence. That's
Yeah,
deep.
I
That's
know
like
that's
that's the
weird.
deepest things. It's almost Buddhism, but I like it
Yeah.
anyway. No, I really appreciate that. That's encouraging. I've had a few people tell me that their favorite part of the show is the after witnessing conversations with
Absolutely.
Ray. And the reason I started doing that is because I genuinely just want to know what he's thinking. And I think so often we don't know what people are thinking, and that's why it's harder for us to learn stuff. So with Ray, I just wanted to get more of an explanation of why he did that, why he asked that, why he said this. So yeah, I've always loved to just kind of try to get Ray's thoughts out a little bit more, because he's got so many of them. He's just got a brilliant mind
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to evangelism, as most people know who've watched his videos. So when I'm talking to someone, I am listening, and I try to listen. And I think that the mistake that we make often is just to hear one thing that they're saying and then just go after that, when that one thing really isn't that big of a deal to that person. So what I try to do is just listen for a while. So let's say in the course of 3 minutes, I'm listening, and they just mention one thing about how they used to be a Mormon. Well, I'm going to kind of remember that, because that tells me that they have some kind of worldview that is just going to be kind of Christian in their vocabulary, but something else. And so I think that's what I do. I just kind of remember things that I think are going to be important for getting to the gospel. And so part of that is you'll hear something where, like you said, you know the answer right away. You know how to answer this thing. You listen to this exact same apologetic thing on the Answers in Genesis website or something. You're ready for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to listen for a while, and they're going to mention all kinds of stuff that I totally don't agree with. stuff that I think is absolutely sinful, stuff that I think, what am I even doing standing here talking to this person? But I'm just going to kind of just listen. And then after a while, I think you'll have a better sense of what's the main issue? What's the real purpose? You know, someone says they're a Catholic, and then 10 minutes later in the conversation, they say something else that totally negates everything they believe about Catholicism. It's like, Catholics don't believe that. Catholics would never do that. This person really isn't like a Catholic who's following Catholicism. So that's kind of what I do. I just do a lot of listening. And I think Ray's really good at that too. So much of this is just, I've learned from Ray. I've been around him for 13 years, listening to his conversations while I'm filming. And so I think just the art of listening itself, you know, people criticize the way the master method when sometimes they say, well, it's just like this cookie cutter thing where you say this, then you say this, and you say this. But in reality, the taking a person through the good person test is simply just a way to remember what is it you need to go to next. How do you get to the gospel? Because there really is no, they say this, I say this, they say this, I say. I think we get ourselves into a lot of trouble, and we just miss the point of this person's issue when we have that mentality. So I think it's just a matter of
You get the
listening.
basic structure and skeleton of that.
Yeah. I actually have a pretty funny story. Something that just happened, just mentioning Mormonism made me remember this. So I lead teams in from my church. And so every once in a while, I'll have people come over to my house and show them a video or do a training or something. And then we'll all go out evangelizing. And so about, I don't know, 3 months ago, maybe, we were doing one of these. So there's people coming into my house from my church. And when I do these, a lot of people get invited, and I know most of the people coming in, but there's always a newcomer. There's always someone who heard about it and they're just coming in, just like a typical home Bible study kind of thing. And so these people are coming into my house, and I'm greeting them. And then this young woman comes in. She's about 25 or so. And she's new. I never seen her before. And so she knocks on the door, and I just say, come on in. And so she comes in, and she's kind of has this surprised look on her face. And I said, yeah, go ahead and sit down. And she's like, really? And I said, yeah, you want a drink of water or anything? And she's like, sure. And then she goes, yeah, I'm just here to sell solar. And so she wasn't part of the of the study at all. She's like, this guy's so nice. He's inviting me into the house. Gave her a drink of water. It was like 100 degrees outside, so she was really happy to get the water. And so I just started laughing, and I said, well, we're having a Bible study. You're welcome to come to it. And she said, well, no, I kind of got to get going. And at this point, there's a bunch of people around from the church that are kind of, some of them are in shock. Some of them are laughing, and they're just listening. And I said, well, can I tell you the main point of what we're teaching in this Bible study, just so you know real quick? And she was kind of laughing, and she goes, sure. And so I took her through the good person test. And it came out that she used to be a Mormon, and she really liked what we were doing. It reminded her of her family a long time ago, but she's not a Mormon anymore. Anyway, we got into this really great conversation, but it was so funny because she's like, oh, come on into my house. Like, sure. And she did, was the funniest part, you know? Anyway,
right. Usually has to fight her way into a house. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's like the paint board. They come to you. That's what you want.
Yeah.
That's terrific.
So Eddie, one of the things I and you're starting to touch on it a little bit here, that I wanted us to get to here is you talked about building your evangelism team at your church. And there's so many evangelists out there that I talk to that say, hey, I'm doing this. There's not many others at my church. How do I really build that evangelism team or get others in my church interested? So, just share some of the things that you've been doing and learned over the years in helping others in that way.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an issue, and there's not a whole lot of churches who have evangelism teams. Working for Way of the Master, I get to hear from all kinds of people who do evangelism all over America. And so I do know of some really great churches with strong evangelism ministries. There are churches where the main pastor goes out evangelizing on a weekly basis and he brings his team with him. So that does exist. It's rare, but it
Yeah.
exists. In my own experience, I would say it's taken a good 13 years for it to get to where it is now. This year is the first year where there are people in an organized fashion going out evangelizing without me. And so that's like a huge blessing to me. It's like a major spiritual accomplishment that I'm just so blessed with, where when I was gone for the last month, there were people going out to the mall. We have a mall table, and they were going there every week on their own, organizing the whole thing, and they still do that. So they do that with or without me now, and so that's just
That's
a
awesome.
super huge encouragement to me. But at the beginning, the way it happened at my church was we have a group of elders at my church. There's no like one pastor in charge. The elders all have equal authority, I guess. And so in one of their meetings, they just kind of realized that the church was very weak as far as evangelism outreach. And I don't even know if they were thinking one-on-one evangelism, or street preaching. They were just thinking, we don't reach out to the community, period.
Right.
And we're only focused on the church. And so within that meeting, they kind of identified another guy at my church who was an evangelist, just did a lot of personal evangelism. And they contacted him and they said, hey, we want to do something with evangelism. We don't know what, but maybe you can come up with something, a class or something like that. And so he ended up doing a class. He used the Living Waters basic training evangelism thing. And
Great place to start.
I had just come back from the academy. So the same guy, he had heard that I was now out street preaching and doing evangelism. So he asked me to come to the class. And so the very next class, I was teaching the class. And so that's how the pastors started to get to know me. Now, at first, it was very slow because two things. One, the people in my church were really not excited about the thought of evangelism, and my pastors didn't know me at all. And so why are they going to trust this guy with leading these things? So that took a while. That took years for them to get to know me and trust me, to where they felt like I was safe, for lack of better words, because it's very common to meet a street evangelist who's just a nut, or just a lone ranger, or has some guy. It's just some guy that, like, for the most part, their theology is good as far as the gospel, but since they're not going to a church anywhere, they end up coming up with all this just stuff on their own thing. Yeah, just a lone ranger. And anyway, so there's I mean, if you go to any beach or anything, you're going to run into people like that once in a while. And so the stereotype of an open air preacher can be pretty bad, as far as what other Christians and especially pastors see. If it's a good pastor, they're going to be a shepherd. They're going to care about their people. They don't want their people to get caught up with some weird theological thing. And so, unfortunately, I think the stereotype of the street evangelists, as far as my pastors were concerned, just wasn't that good. And then something happened that made it even worse. I got back from the academy, and a group of guys that I had met at the academy, they're going out street preaching, and they have all these props. And so they invite me to come on one of their things, open air preaching at a car show. And these guys show up, and they roll out this brand new pearl white coffin, like a real coffin. Cost like $1,000. They had like got the people at their church on their team to pay for it. So they roll out this coffin on like this really nice rolling stand, and they open it up. It's got like tracks and like a skull and like all the stuff in it. And so now we're all preaching in front of this coffin, and it's just kind of crazy, And someone from my church, unbeknownst to me, they walk by, and 2 days later, I'm being told, "Hey, the elders don't want you preaching with coffins anymore," and stuff. And so I became known as like the weird guy. But I didn't even, it wasn't even my coffin, you know. And so anyway, I basically told them all, I won't do that anymore. But anyway, so it's like, sorry about that. And then the very next time I go to street preach, another guy shows up and he lays a full-size skeleton like right in front of the box that I'm standing on while I'm preaching. I'm like, what is up with these people in their it was so funny. But anyway,
It wasn't Halloween, was it?
Yeah, no, it was crazy. It was so funny. But yeah, so years went by and they got to know me and they saw that I didn't have coffins and skeletons everywhere. But anyway, so yeah, there was just a trust involved. So it was just really, I think the same qualifications they would give to any pastor or anyone else that they're entrusting to lead the people of their church. Some churches kind of hand off leadership to anyone. It's like, oh, you're breathing? Here, take care of the kids, But
Breathing
exactly. But a shepherd who really cares about their people, it's going to take them a while to give someone their I don't know, authority to
Right.
be able to lead their
Yeah.
people. And so with me, that was kind of the situation.
Christ, you're representing the church.
Yeah. And so it took a while, but all that said, over the years, I've had just tons of home fellowships and, years of times when it was just myself and two other people or myself and three other people. I've done the basic training classes many times. There were times when it was two people, a couple, or one person, but I would just do the whole thing, just go the whole 8 weeks. I don't care if it's one person. If they show up, I'm going to teach it. And so I've just always made it a point to just keep going no matter who's in front of you, mainly because I love it, mainly because I want to do it. And, I guess that
It sounds like a lot of consistency and accountability and listening. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you feel like, so you were mentioning a little earlier that there's a lot of churches that don't have evangelism ministries within the walls of the church. And obviously you went on to explain that sometimes you'll see some people street preaching who maybe have some questionable methods. Do you attribute that at all to the reason why more churches aren't building ministry teams? Because it kind of seems like, I mean, the Great Commission is sort of a big deal, right? And that seems like a major weakness in the American church as a whole. If a statement like that could be made, that most churches or many churches don't even have evangelists or evangelism teams or aren't interested in evangelism or have insular ideas of what evangelism should look like. I mean, what do you attribute that to? Is it just the reputation of the street preacher, or is there something else?
I don't know. Boy, that's something I've thought about. I know that in certain kinds of churches, evangelism is more common. So you got like the traditional, I don't know, maybe fundamentalist Baptist church that they're going to go out and we got to go out door to door and do this once a week, and so that still exists in a lot of places. And unfortunately, sometimes that can come with a lot of guilt and a lot of, I'm out evangelizing because I'm being forced to do that. I've known some people who've come from churches like that. So I can't say, when I say that most churches don't do that, obviously I know what the denominations that I'm around kind of do and don't do. But I would say that the reason most churches, at least the ones I've seen, don't have any kind of evangelism ministry is because there's not a whole lot of people within that church, individuals who are attempting to do that. I mean, I honestly, evangelism is not an easy thing. It can be a scary thing. It can be an intimidating thing. And I think when people aren't evangelizing, when they haven't had that experience of even seeing someone else doing it, it's really easy for them to fall into that mindset that, I don't know, I don't want to try this because it just seems too hard. I
Yeah.
think that's one aspect of it, that just the individual fear. But I also think that, unfortunately, a lot of churches, even churches with good doctrine, they focus more on the ministry within their church, ministry to Christians, which is important. We should be
Important.
counseling, we should be serving one
Right.
another. That's absolutely important. But I think that because pastors and leaders in churches tend to be so focused on their people, they just really aren't thinking about the people outside of the church. I think that that's just one of the issues there.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Do you do you have any advice or warnings for someone who's never evangelized and wants to get started?
Yeah, I would say the warning is to not give into your fear and not allow the what if this happens kind of things to stop you. If you have been born again, you have the Holy Spirit within you. That Holy Spirit wants to use you as his vessel and wants to reach out to the lost. And Satan and the world and your flesh, they're all going to come against that. They're all going to come against that desire. Man, I remember having the desire to reach out and evangelize for years, for pretty much my entire Christian walk before I started. It's just there. And most of the Christians I've met have that same desire. They know it's right. If anything, they just know it's the right thing to do. But it's really easy just to give into the flesh and to listen to your fears. And so I would just say, trust God. The Bible says the just shall live by faith. And we live in a society where there's really not a whole lot of opportunities to practice your faith as a Christian. You go to church once a week, and maybe you go to a midweek Bible study. But other than that, walking by faith so often just looks more like the bad things that you don't do than you're actually going out and doing something for the Lord. So I would say, just live like a Christian. Step out in faith. You don't need to be in a Bible story about to face Goliath. You just need to go talk to your next door neighbor. Just walk by faith. It's going to be scary sometimes, going to be intimidating sometimes, but God is good and he's holy, and he's still the same God who led all those people in Hebrews chapter 11 by faith. And he can do the same for you as you step out in faith and just follow him in the area of evangelism.
Yeah. Yep. Eddie, if someone wants to get a hold of you, talk more, or find out some more things from you, what's the best way? I mean, you've got a website, a social media channel, things like that. You want to share any of that information?
Yeah, thanks. I would say eddieroman.com. That's the one I remember the easiest. eddieroman.com, and on there's a contact page, and shoot me an email. I answer them. I don't get millions of emails like Ray Comfort or anything. So yeah, if you shoot me an email there, you get a hold of me. My podcast is it hasn't been updated recently. I think I'm going to try to do my annual episode pretty soon, but it's just funny. For this last year, I've been so busy either with Living Waters. I'm also now involved being trained as a biblical counselor, and so that's taken up a lot of time. I just found myself doing so much counseling on the street that it just kind of made sense to just get some formal training for that and do it at my church. So that's just, and then I got a wife and 4 sons and just a whole lot of time. And when I get home from work after working on videos and podcasts and computers, the last thing I want to do is go and do another podcast. So, but I do really want to
You're
get back
here with
to
us
it.
today.
Yes,
So,
exactly. Well, you guys are doing all the work, so it makes it easy for
yes.
me. So appreciate that.
You also have. I know you're working currently on the upcoming season of Wave the Master, so folks should be looking out for that. You know when that's going to be available.
Boy, that's always the question
The hard
I
question to
dread
answer.
answering. So We are, so I'm currently working on seasons 9, 10, and 11 simultaneously. Season 9, it's looking like it'll probably be out in the spring. And so, it's one of the things we're doing different is we're trying to get away from Huntington Beach. As much as we love Huntington Beach, just it seems like everything comes out of Living Waters is Huntington Beach. So this last year, I went to the annual Alien Festival in Roswell, New Mexico, and we got some really great interviews and footage there. And we've just been trying to go to different places and preach the gospel. So season 9 is going to be a lot of fun. Season 10, I'm currently working on the logistics. We are going to try to get back to what we did back in season 4, which was the season where we went all over Europe and went to 13 countries and open air preached there. So we're going to try to do that kind of thing again in different parts of the world. So so I'm currently making plans to go to Australia and New Zealand and kind of retrace the early steps of Ray Comfort, kind of give his origin story, but also go into all these different countries in that region and doing open air preaching and street witnessing there. That's season 10, and we're actually going to be making that trip in October for the filming, and then planning for season 11. Just looking ahead. My job is so crazy. I just booked hotel rooms for the 2024 Paris Olympics. And so that's in a year. And so we will be there kind of doing a similar thing that we did at the coronation, but with the Olympics and all these things that we do. I'm there filming them for Way of the Master. And so that's kind of what we do.
It's awesome. I always wonder with Huntington Beach, I know there's a ton of people, but like sometimes I wonder, like, don't you kind of just like run into the same people over and over again?
Absolutely. Oh yeah. The locals. People know Ray. Everybody knows Ray who's been there for a while, but it's actually good, So we'll run into someone, and it's usually very very cordial, even happy, and Ray will say something like, "Hey, you've been thinking about what I told you about 2 years ago," or whatever it was. So Ray's the same. He's very consistent. But yes, we definitely run into the same people. But there are definitely thousands of new people there every weekend. I mean, the place is probably the most popular tourist spot in Orange County, other than Disneyland. But you got to pay to go to Disneyland. Huntington Beach is free. So, but yeah, it's actually kind of rare that I see the same faces. So there's just
there's just so many people coming in.
So many people all the time. Yeah. And right now it's summer. It's 100 degrees. 30 minutes away, so everyone's rushing to the beach, so even tomorrow I'll be out there, and there's never a dull moment in Huntington Beach. Always something going on there.
Last thing I think we'd like you to speak to real quick, your book Search and Rescue, which is available again on Amazon and also at eddieroman.com. Can you just tell us a little bit about that real quick?
Yeah, the book was actually kind of an accident. The book it began as my thesis for my pastoral training. So I took a 3-year pastoral training through my church, and in the last year I had to write a thesis. So I wrote it on evangelism, and my teachers, the elders at my church, they all kind of told me that they thought it was really good and I should try to get it published. And they didn't tell that to everybody. So I kind of took that as, that's kind of neat. That's cool. I looked into self-publishing it. It was either too expensive or I just didn't have time. And so I just kind of forgot about it. About a year later, Ray Comfort pops his head into my office and he says, "Hey, my publishers are here. We're going to go to lunch. You want to come with us?" And just total as a joke, I said, "Yeah, you could tell them about my book." And he said, "You wrote a book?" And I said, "Yeah, you reviewed it and said it was good." And he said, "Oh yeah, that's right." I remember it. Because part of the assignment at school was you had to have people read it and comment on it, and he was one of the guys who did that. And so we go to lunch, and Ray just says, "Hey, Eddie wrote a book." That's all he said. "Hey, Eddie wrote a book." And then that just turned into, "Really? You wrote a book? We'd love to see it." And next thing I know, I'm signing a contract and I got a published book. So the great thing about it is that multiple churches have used it to train their people. A lot of people have used it in Bible studies. And it's just, it's, according to them, not just me, according to them, it's effective. I wrote it in a way where it was just very simple to understand. There's a lot of theology in it, but I definitely wrote it for the layman because I had to understand it. So I can understand it. That means most people can understand it. But yeah, it's my whole point of it was just to get people evangelizing and just kind of show them that it's something we're supposed to be doing. It's not just a optional thing. It really is something we're supposed to be doing. I think most Christians know that. And so my book definitely reinforces that. It's a Bible study and why that is, all these different places in the Bible where it talks about that. But then also just laying out just how do you do this? What is the theology behind evangelism? And more importantly, I think for most Christians, just practically, how do you start witnessing to people? So that's what the book is all about. Search and rescue.
Awesome. So again, folks, that is available on Amazon and eddieroman.com. Eddie, thanks so much for joining us here. We want to thank everyone who stuck around and listened. We're sure you were listening for Eddie, not for us. But no, this was great. We really appreciate it. We want to thank also Nick Garland for the music. And when you're done or before you get out of here, please hit the subscribe button. This is hopefully just the first of many episodes, Lord willing, of this podcast. We're really appreciative of everyone who stuck around and gave it a listen. We hope that it nourished you and helped to inspire and equip you. And that's it. Number 1 is in the books, John. We did it. We made it.
All right. Awesome.
All right.
Great.
All right. Thanks again, folks. Eddie, thanks again. John, it was fun. We'll see you next time on Bibles and Bullhorns.
Thank you, guys. All right. It's time.